Hey everybody, Seth and Paul here with the Home Team Brokers, and if you have never bought a home or haven't bought a home recently, in this video we're going to take you through the steps of the sale. And we're actually at an inspection right now in Lincoln City for a home that we just sold. And if you haven't done an inspection in a while or ever, these things usually take about 3 hours. The buyer's agents, us, will be here at the inspection. The buyer can also come to the inspection as well. And there's usually a little bit of downtime, so a great time for us to shoot a video and walk through the steps of the sale with all of our followers.
Let's talk about it right now. Hey, what's up everybody? This is Paul and Seth with the Home Team Brokers coming to you from the Oregon coast. And if this is your first time to the channel, living on the Oregon coast, and you want to learn everything there is to know about what it's like to live, work, eat, sleep, play, the pros and cons of living at the Oregon coast, make sure to hit the subscribe button and tap the little bell to get notified every time we drop a new video. We get people reaching out to us all the time who are relocating to the Oregon coast or buying a second home or vacation home, and we love to hear from you. So if that's you, give us a call, send us a text, shoot us an email, or click the link below in the description and schedule a Zoom call with us. However you decide to get a hold of us, we would love to help you.
All right, let's get into it. So I'm thinking about buying a house. I'm thinking about moving somewhere along the Oregon coast. What do I do? Where do I start?
Well, I mean, the first thing you need to look at is where you want to buy. And, as you may know, the Oregon coastline is 363 miles. So there's three very distinct regions. There are some larger towns, some smaller towns. There's some areas that are more remote. There's some areas that have more activities, either outdoor activities or things to do in town. So I think really the best thing for somebody to do, if they know they love the Oregon coast, they love the scenery and everything that the Oregon coast has to offer, is think about what's the intention of purchasing a home. What's going to fit your lifestyle. Are you going to be living there for weeks out of the year? Are you going to be living there full time? Are you looking to rent it out? So kind of going off what you want to use the property for, that will then kind of either exclude some areas that won't make as much sense, and it's probably going to put some areas toward the top of the list just right away.
Right, yeah. And if you're somebody that's coming from out of town, which we do get a lot of people reaching out to us from out of town, especially California, and you've never been to the Oregon coast, that's part of what Paul and I can do, is we can kind of walk you through all the different areas, the different towns, the different amenities. Weather is going to vary from different places on the Oregon coast too, so kind of getting a feel for where's going to be the best spot for you on the Oregon coast is kind of where we start, and really kind of narrow down that spot. Because a lot of people, even some people in Oregon sometimes, aren't really sure, I don't know if I want to be in the northern Oregon coast or kind of more the central Oregon coast. So that's part of what we'll be here for, is to narrow down your search for the perfect town on the Oregon coast. And then some people are looking for a specific property too. So some people are looking for, maybe they want water views,
sure.
Maybe they want a big lot. There are certain things about a property that are going to make it maybe more exclusive. And so you might be property searching a little bit more than the actual town, and the property that you're looking for is going to kind of dictate the area. You just might not find certain properties on the southern Oregon coast, or you might not find certain properties on the northern Oregon coast. So the type of property you're looking for may very well dictate the area, but it's going to be one of those two things that we're going to start with, is figuring out where you want to be and then what type of property, again, and that might kind of dictate the area. And then once we do that, then we can actually start looking at properties, viewing different properties, and actually scheduling showings to go tour properties. Or if you are one of those people from out of town, we'll go tour the property for you, make a video for you, give it the sniff test, like run through the property, get our opinion on the property, and we can actually do a tour for you virtually if you're coming from out of town, which isn't uncommon.
Yeah. So in particular, the people that are coming from out of state, it just doesn't make sense to fly to and from several times to tour properties. So that is an arrangement that we have quite a bit with people, and it's really built on quite a bit of trust. And Seth and I take a lot of pride in being able to provide as honest of feedback as possible. Not just give our opinion, because everybody has their own kind of subjective opinion on if a place is nice or not, but we really have to look at where are some of the defects right away. What are some of the things that you can see right out of the gate that could be an issue? Or hey, maybe it's the perfect location, maybe it checks a lot of the boxes, but if there are some things that you've explained to us are kind of deal breakers for you, we're gonna talk about that first, because a lot of times there's never going to be a house that checks all of the boxes and it's absolutely perfect. And if there are things that are going to be either a health and safety hazard or concern, or something that you've talked about is something that is kind of a deal breaker for you, we're going to talk about that first and eliminate it. So I think sometimes we find ourselves talking people out of property, because they see the photos, on the listing online, everything looks really nice. It's really easy to make a house look really nice and presentable, just through the photos, but not until you actually get in, start looking around, can you get a true feel for what that property is going to be like. So
yeah, that's an important point too, because last year more homes were bought sight unseen than ever before in history, and a lot of that is a big chunk of this market now is millennials. Millennials are shopping and buying stuff online, so they're sort of conditioned to doing that.
Yeah.
Even houses, as crazy as that sounds,
Yeah.
people buying stuff, sight unseen. So it really helps to have some boots on the ground and have somebody like us to actually go through, walk through a property, tour it for you, again, if you can't make it yourself, and give you some honest feedback on that property.
Yeah, so look at determining the right area, and we're going to help you out with that. We're going to talk about what areas make the most sense for you based on what you're describing. I mean, we hear a lot of things. Surprisingly, almost everybody wants to be close to an airport. Well, there's some places on the Oregon coast where it's a lot harder to get to an airport, where it's going to take an extra hour, an extra 2 hours, 3 hours, depending on where you are, to get to an airport. There are towns that, kind of a highway feeds directly into it from the east, so there's going to be more traffic. It's probably going to be a little more tourist oriented. And then there's going to be towns that are a little more off the beaten path, where you have more privacy, maybe a little more room to breathe, things like that. So it's all about lifestyle. And then factoring into that too, budget, because I think a lot of people move to the Oregon coast and they want to be by the ocean. They want to see the ocean. They want to wake up, drink their coffee in the morning, and sit on their deck and look at the waves and everything. And that's certainly attainable, but that's probably, at least from what I've seen, the biggest determinant as far as adding a lot of value to a property. If you take two properties side by side that are more or less exactly the same, similar lot, similar size down the line, but one has an ocean view, I mean, you could be adding $100,000 right there.
Yeah, everybody wants an ocean view.
Yeah. So
even if it's a sliver, even if I can see it from from one window from a second floor, people want to be able to see some water. What's
great though too, and what we tell people a lot, and where there ends up being a little bit of an exception being made, is most likely anywhere you land, you're going to be maybe a 5 to 10 minute walk, maybe at most a 5 to 10 minute drive to a beach. So it's right there, it's very accessible regardless of where you're at, but being right there on the water or having a sweeping view, of the ocean may or may not be realistic, just kind of depending on, where the budget sits relative to the house that you want to buy and all of that.
Yeah, okay, so once you've figured out your area or the property or both, then comes the fun part, touring, and once you find a property, making an offer.
Yeah. Well, I think, once you've determined your area and you're kind of taking the steps, you're looking at the budget, I think really, before anything else, you got to find a realtor to work with. You got to find a real estate team to work with. And, we've talked a little bit about our process and kind of how that looks, especially for people who aren't local, going and looking at properties and kind of being those boots on the ground. You're not going to find that with every agent. We pride ourselves on a lot of things. Communication is a big thing. As far as being able to communicate quickly, act quickly on properties that look good when it comes time to make an offer. In this type of market, that goes a long way because homes are selling very fast, inventory's low. It's probably the same where you are too. So working with a team that is going to communicate quickly, act quickly, be willing to go into these properties, do the video tours, and kind of do the things that are needed to get the job done, is going to give you a much better advantage in ultimately getting into the house that you're looking for. So just had to let them know that they ultimately, you got to call us.
And we cover a lot of ground, and that's a reason why a lot of people call us too.
Yeah.
Most realtors are just going to work one town.
Yeah, or one county, or maybe a 50-mile stretch. That seems to be pretty common.
Yeah. Whereas we cover all 363 miles of the coast, right? So, all right, so we found a house, writing an offer. How do we win an offer on a house?
Well, because of the nature of the market, being, the inventory is on the lower side, it is really competitive. Most houses that you would be interested in, odds are there's going to be other people that are interested in that property as well. So we're seeing right when homes get listed, they're getting, a lot of tours scheduled right out of the gate. Typically, offers start coming in within days, if not like the next day. And that's not the case all the time. I mean, that's probably within a certain price range. I think once you get up over maybe $1.5 million or so, it may not be as competitive necessarily. Yeah. So it does vary, but I think, you got to get on the phone with a listing agent and, ask what's important to their sellers.
Yeah. I mean, all the desirable properties have multiple offers. This property that we got accepted on had multiple offers, just like every other property. So one place that we'll start with is by first determining how much we think the home is worth. Is the home priced at market value? Is it priced above market value? Is it priced below market value? And then we do that by determining, by looking at comps. So we look at other homes that have sold recently that are comparable. That's what a comp is. And then that'll kind of guide us to tell us whether or not the home is underpriced, overpriced, or priced right at market value. And then once we kind of know that, then we can kind of predict, is this home going to get, a bunch of offers? Is this home only going to get a couple offers because it's really overpriced and maybe you got some sellers that are really trying to take advantage of this market? So once we get a feel for the home's value, talk to the agent, like Paul said. That is a big thing, is having communication with the seller's agent, getting as much information as we can. That will kind of help to guide us to decide what we think the home's worth, how many offers it's going to get, and that's going to determine how we're going to write our offer. So we're not just writing offers based on a list price. We're writing offers based on what we think the home is worth, what we think the home's going to go for. We're not just looking at homes that recently sold either too, but we're just also looking at some of the other numbers, like how much did those homes sell for? Did they sell 5% above asking, or an average 8% above asking? And is this home going to do the same?
Sometimes a little below asking.
Some stuff will go a little bit below, and in this market you do have some sellers that are trying to take advantage of the market, of course, being such a seller's market. So you are seeing some stuff that is priced really high, and that is a case where you might see something go below list value, or what the home's actually listed at. Might still be above what the home's probably valued at, or what the home might appraise for, but might actually go a little bit less than actually what it's listed for.
Yeah, so the list price is really just a starting point. There's a lot of work that goes into ultimately determining what we should offer, to make you as competitive as possible, but also to make sure that you're not overpaying as well. But the list price that you see, there probably was some thought that went into that, but at the same time, a seller, somebody who's selling their home, they can pick a number out of thin air, they can pull a number out of a hat, or more commonly, kind of like Seth was alluding to, they can say, well, I think my property is worth this, even though the market may not agree. People tend to think their property is worth a little bit more than it is. And in particular, because the market has been so hot, homes are selling above asking, I think sellers are really kind of geared toward that mindset of trying to ultimately get as much as they can for their home, and as they should, but obviously the market is going to ultimately determine what the home is worth when it ends up selling.
Right. So what are some of the other things we can do to make our offers more competitive?
Well, I think we have to look at what our buyers are willing to potentially add into the offer that doesn't put them in a bad position. Sometimes you can work within somebody's timeline, especially if they're relocating to the area and they're not going to move out here for another 2 or 3 months. Often, in particular in this market, sellers want something called rent back. So they want to rent, or lease the home back for 30 days or 60 days. And sometimes that's something that we can offer to the seller because they very well may need it. And it actually may end up, working in the buyer's favor because it works within their timeline. And they're not really, giving up anything because they weren't going to be moving out there anyway. So that seems to be something that works really well in this market.
Yeah, that's probably a big thing, right? Because most sellers might not have somewhere to go.
Right.
So being able to have an extra 30 or 60 days after you close to stay in your home to find another place to go is probably one of the biggest things for sellers right now.
Yeah, and there's a lot of other things that you can look at. I mean, ultimately, our job is to put our client's best interest in mind and, protect those interests as far as, putting our buyers in the best position possible when they're going to buy. So, depending on the condition of the house, we're going to make sure that if there's any issues, we're going to negotiate that to get those things done. Generally in this market, we're not asking for cosmetic things to be repaired. That's typically something that a house that is attracting a lot of offers, odds are there's at least going to be one offer that isn't asking for any like cosmetic repairs. So that's something that where a buyer who's maybe not as familiar with the process, hasn't bought a house in a long time, or it's their first time buying a house. There might be some kind of misconception there as far as what we may be asking the seller to do as far as repairs and things that they may want fixed versus things that probably should be fixed if they're going to then ultimately take possession of the home.
And that's kind of a big deal because every property, even new houses, have little fixes typically that they need, little tiny things, whether it's a leaky faucet, or just the smallest, littlest cosmetic things. When you do an inspection, which we're doing right now, the inspector is going to find all of this, like just a laundry list of things. And so when you make an offer in a home, that offer is accepted, you go through the inspection process. The inspector is going to find a lot of little things, and in order to make your offer more competitive, you can say to the seller, hey, I'm not going to nitpick, I'm not going to nickel and dime you, I'm not going to ask for all these little repairs. Whereas, if it's more of a buyer's market, you could ask for those things. The seller would be happy to make a bunch of little repairs just to sell their home when it's in a case where it's tough for them to sell. But when they have buyers, kicking down the door, lining up at the door, offering above asking, it usually makes it more competitive to not nitpick over the little repairs. Now, the big stuff we do look at, if there's any problems with the roof or the furnace or anything that's really expensive like that, that's a different story, but little stuff, usually you're excluding that in order to be more competitive.
Yeah, so ultimately it's going to come down to communication like we talked about earlier. So we want to be able to speak with the listing agent and not just ask the question, but sometimes you have to kind of poke and prod a little bit to get answers out of them. So we need to be able to have the right conversation to figure out what's important to their sellers and incorporate what we're willing to give, in the offer. Again, as long as it doesn't put our buyers in any compromised situations.
Yeah. Other than that, writing the offer, maybe a few other little things. We usually want to go through the house and take a look and see if there's anything in the house that you want left in the house. Like, for example, this is a new construction, so there was never a fridge here. But if it was a resale and there's a fridge here, for example, you might say that you want to keep all the appliances. And typically the sellers are willing to concede those things. If you want to leave, all the appliances or anything else that you see, the home as is, and basically ask the seller to not take anything that's not attached to the home. Usually you'll get by with that. But again, in this case, there was no fridge.
At the end of the day, sellers, aside from price and some of the things that we've talked about, they just want a smooth experience and they want some assurances. So again, that's where communication comes back in, and not just getting a feel for some of the things that the seller's looking for in the sale of their home beyond the list price, but also assuring their listing agent, which ultimately is going to assure them that we're actually going to get the deal done. We're going to communicate on time, we're going to meet our deadlines, and we're going to get things done in a smooth and timely fashion. And some of those things probably sound like it's a given, but there's
some agents just send in offers without ever speaking to the listing agent.
Right.
So some buyers agents have literally zero communication with the listing agent. That's just some people's style, which is fine. Paul and I's style is to communicate more and to gather more information. We think that's a more effective way to have this type of transaction. But so yeah, it's not just a given that there's going to be a good stream of communication between the buyer's agent and the seller's agent. There's definitely buyer's agents out there that don't communicate.
Yeah.
So once we get our offer accepted, what's next?
Once we get the offer accepted, we're going to start going through these steps in the contract period, and right out of the gate, you're going to want to deposit your earnest money.
Typically 3 days.
Yeah,
that'll be specified in the contract though.
Yeah, within 3 days, and then we're going to have an inspection period, and the standard inspection period is 10 business days. So more or less a couple weeks. Sometimes we can shorten that. Sometimes a seller wants to close quickly, and that's something that we can incorporate into our offer. So usually if we're closing quickly, we want to get the inspection done quickly, get the report, do those negotiations as needed, and get that taken care of, probably more like within 5 to 7 business days. So that's something we're seeing a lot of right now. And then once the inspection period is up, everything is good, maybe we've negotiated some repairs on your behalf.
And elaborate a little bit more on that. What does that look like? So when you get the inspection report back?
Generally, you're looking at anything that is, tied to potential health and safety hazards. Again, a lot of the cosmetic stuff, as far as little things that could be repaired or fixed, painted, scuffs that could be cleaned off, that's generally not something that we want to ask for. But if there are any issues where there could potentially be health and safety hazards for the buyer, we want to be able to get a bid for that work right out of the gate. So as soon as we have that information handed to us, we want to look at what are the costs going to be to mitigate these issues, repair or fix some of these damages or issues, and then usually we're going to want to ask the seller for a credit for the cost, so the buyer can then take care of those issues on their end. That's going to provide more transparency, I think, for the buyer, as opposed to relying on the seller to go through the steps of getting the bids, contracting out the work, making sure that it's done correctly. So if we can put a dollar amount on these things and then ask the seller for a credit, typically toward closing costs at the end of the transaction.
In other words, you just get a check back to cover the cost of repairs that you've negotiated through the inspection period.
Right. So say you need, an extra 20 grand of cash to cover your closing costs. Well, we can ask for a credit toward those closing costs. So now you're paying less cash at that time, freeing up more cash for you to then go take care of those issues.
So typically an inspection would look like, okay, there's all these little things, there's a bunch of cosmetic things, and there's usually going to be a few safety and health hazards that you'll want to have repaired almost immediately, and so that's what Paul and I will go back to the listing agent and negotiate for. Again, we're probably just going to forego any of the little tiny cosmetic stuff, $50 here, $150 there, to fix this or that, but something that's larger or that's a safety hazard, we'll negotiate that with the seller's agent, and then you can sometimes get these things repaired before you close. Oftentimes it is more of a win-win to just get a credit at closing. That way you can kind of oversee the repair yourself as the new homeowner, and the seller, it's just easier for them just to give you a check back, with their equity at closing, rather than the seller having to, go through the process of, trying to work with you to get somebody in here for a bid and then for the job and to get it all repaired, especially with labor shortages these days. Really tough to get electricians and plumbers and all those people into a house, especially in that type of in that period too. Inspection period is 10 daes typically, to make offers more competitive. Sometimes you will offer a 7-day inspection period, just to make your offer a little bit more competitive. So sometimes you only have 7 instead of 10 days. So it's a quick period to get an inspector out, look at the house, find out what's wrong with it, get some bids, figure out how much everything's going to cost, and then either negotiate repairs, or like Paul said, you're probably just going to negotiate repairs, a credit at selling rather.
Yep. So sometimes, that process can be a little more involved depending on how the inspection report comes back. Sometimes it's, super easy, maybe a couple things, all parties agree, and we're off and running. So once that's taken place, if you're financing the home, then the lender is going to order an appraisal to make sure that what you're paying for the house is falling in line with what the appraised value of the home is. And there can be some issues there at times where...
Probably more issues now than ever, huh?
Yeah, I mean, with homes selling, 25, 50, 100 grand over list price, because the market is so competitive, you are seeing offers that cover what's called an appraisal gap. So if an appraiser says the home is worth $50,000 less than what somebody's buying it for, the lender is only going to finance up to that amount, that appraised amount, not what you're actually buying it for. So we are seeing, where if you can have a little extra cash reserve to cover that gap, then you can get the deal done. Depending on how aggressive your offer is, relative to the list price, relative to comps that we can find and things like that, we may need to have that discussion. But
well, the reason why you want to do that too, let's say that you offer 550 on a house and appraises for 500.
Right.
Okay, now the seller is going to say, well, I still want my 550.
Right.
And you're going to say, well, the bank's only going to give me 500. And the seller is going to say, well, I'm going to go to one of my other 12 other offers then. I'm going to go to my one that offered me 545 or 540. So if you're not able to cover that gap, they're going to maybe default to one of their other offers. So in order to be competitive, some people are offering cash to cover the gap that might be discovered once there's an appraisal by the bank.
Yeah, so the more cash you're coming into a transaction with, kind of across the board regardless, is always going to be better and probably make you a little more competitive. There's just more assurances in the eyes of the seller. But if you're planning on putting 30-40% down, it may make sense to take 5% of that sum and not put that in the down payment, but reserve that for a potential appraisal gap.
Yeah.
If you need it, great, you're covered. If not, you still have the cash free up. You can use it towards closing costs, for example. So, these are things that we're seeing at times. It doesn't happen all the time, but we're going to know going into a transaction whether or not that's going to potentially be something that we need to talk about.
Right. Going back to what we said about the very beginning about how instead of going off the list price, we're going to determine the value of the home. Okay. That will kind of give us a better idea if it's going to appraise for what it should or not. Right. So once we know the value, so going off the value of the home, what we believe the home is valued at, rather than just the list price, will give us a better idea if we're going to encounter a potential appraisal gap.
Now, if you're paying cash, not something you have to worry about. If you are financing, after the appraisal, the loan's going to go to underwriting, for final approval. Once everything's cleared, that typically doesn't take too long. You'll be cleared to close, and you can either, at that point, close on your close date if that's what makes sense, or sometimes you can close a little bit early if everything else is in the clear. Sometimes you can close 5, 6, 7 days early potentially once all of these steps are then taken care of.
Which typically takes about, 17, 18, 19 business days typically to go through that entire process. When you write an offer, typically you write in the offer about 30 days. So 30 days from the date that you're writing that offer, and that usually gives you enough time. Gives you a couple days wiggle room, but typically it's not going to take that long.
Yeah, historically, when you write an offer, you can kind of plan on 30 to 45 days to close. Because the market is so hot, things are moving so quickly, people do want to close quicker. You do see closer to like 3 weeks, 24 days, and you're good to go. Obviously, if you're making a cash offer, you can close 7 to 10 days potentially, depending on how quickly you can get things inspected and everything. But everyone's timeline's a little bit different, but you can typically close in less than 30 days.
Yeah. So I think that's it.
Yeah.
If this video helped, give us a thumbs up. If you have any questions, you can comment below. We'll reply to those comments. If you are ready to start the conversation about moving, whether you're in state or out of state, you can give us a call, send us a text, shoot us an email, or click the link below if you want to schedule a Zoom. Yeah, make sure to subscribe to the channel, hit the little bell to get notified when we drop new videos. We put these out at least once a week, so thanks for watching, and we'll talk to you later. All right, thanks everyone, take care.